Hi, I'm Benton Stokes,
And I'm Elaine O'Rourke.
and this is Cocktail Theology. Hi there.
Hi there.
How's it going?
Better now.
Better now?
Better now. I did not have a bad day, but it is always better to be in your presence, always better to be drinking a cocktail you have made me.
Oh, well, thanks.
See?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, just those two things, those alone. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little sniffly. A change of seasons. Fall gets me this way. And I'm really trying to baby my voice in my throat since I'm singing later this week.
And why is it you're singing later this week, Mr.
Well,
Stokes?
since you asked, I am recording a lead vocal on the new single, which is called Stronger, on Thursday at Dennis Deering's place. Dennis co-produced the two records that I have out with me. I've known Dennis for 20 plus years, and we've done a lot of work together. We've been nominated for Doves together. We have a long history, and working with Dennis is just so comfortable and easy and fun. So I'm going to go in with the track that I've done here at the house and record a vocal on Thursday. So I'm super excited about that. But I've been kind of babying my voice because when I get this way, I tend to get a little hoarse and sometimes more than hoarse. And so I'm just guarding against that.
Guarding and gargling and all of those gar words.
all the gar
Gar
things.
words. Gar
And
things.
tons of water. However, I'm not drinking water at the moment.
What
If you hear ice clinking, it's a margarita because we're at my house, and I do Manhattans and margaritas, mostly. That's a lot of M's.
It is a lot of M's. I was thinking you're practicing your consonants. Is it consonants or alliteration?
That would be consonants. I've been working on a Christmas song. I've been working on follow-up singles to Stronger. So I've got lots of new music coming down the pike over the next few months. So super excited.
Which is a wonderful thing. And I'm excited about the fact our retreat is coming up.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, by the time you guys hear this, the registration for that retreat will be closed. So you will not be able to come. But you can bring us to your little town, to
can.
your little church, to your little school, to your little anything, your
Yep.
little living room.
Yep.
In all different kinds of combinations. Benton can play music. We can do Cocktail Theology live. I can talk about the stuff I talk about. We can do things together. We would love to come see you. And we're actually planning out 2019 now. So if you are interested at all in having us come to your neck of the woods, please send us an email at info@schoolforseekers.com and tell us kind of where you are and what vaguely you're thinking about, and we will see if we can work that in.
Yes, we will.
Because I would love to be on tour more next year.
Oh, I would too.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Could we get an Airstream?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Great. I love
Anyway.
our streams.
So there we are. So that's what we're doing. So we went on a mini road trip yesterday. It was a very mini road trip. It was a very short mini road trip. We had been out of town for the funeral of the father of a friend and then had to drive back. And so that was kind of our mini road trip. But we got talking about what it was we wanted to talk about to kind of close out this first inaugural season of Cocktail Theology.
Yep.
And we had received a couple of suggestions from y'all, and we're playing with that. And what we came to was sort of a, I guess, kind of a three-part series on what is it we're talking about when we're talking about X.
Yes. What are we really talking about?
What are we really talking about? And this all came out of my assertion that when we're talking about something like homosexuality, or we're talking about patriotism, or we're talking about nominations to the Supreme Court, or we're talking about anything, really, we're not talking about what we're talking about. We're talking about something else. So let me give you an example of this. A long time ago, when I was still pastoring a church, and I was marrying, I wasn't marrying, but I was the officiant at, because that could be really complicated. I started to say I was marrying my choir director and her fiance, but see, that just sounds bad, doesn't it? Anyway, they had gotten into a tiff at Disneyland. Young woman had wanted a second ice cream cone. And her then fiance made some kind of remark about that. And they got into a big fight.
Oh boy.
Big fight. We were talking about it, And my response was, okay, it wasn't about the ice cream cone. So what was it about? And not because the ice cream cone wasn't important, but when we get into big fights over something, we're not battling over an ice cream cone. We're battling over what the ice cream cone represents, what it means for us, all the other triggers, all the other buttons, all the other fill in your metaphor here.
Right.
As we were talking about these two issues that we both really wanted to talk about, one would be, how do I want to put this? It isn't even homosexuality, that's not right.
Other people's sexuality.
Other people's sexuality. Good way to put it. What people think about other people's sexuality, what we're talking about when we're talking about other people's sexuality. And we also wanted to talk about what we're talking about when we're talking about patriotism. And that based on the whole Kaepernick inspiring the NFL players' protests and how some people get all bent out of shape about it on one side and some people get bent out of shape. Anyway, all the bending out of shapes. So that's a really long way of saying what we're going to be talking about for this next three is what is it we're talking about when we're talking about whatever it is we're talking about.
Yeah.
My opening salvo is that when we get, not you and I, when one gets into well, it can't be one. I guess you could be one if it's just in your head. When two people or more get into a fight about an ice cream cone, it's not about the ice cream cone.
It's never about the ice cream cone.
It's never about the ice cream cone. So, what is it about then?
I read part of an article today that was dealing with the current confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh. And the article that I read was basically talking about how we're all looking at the same facts, but the way that we read the facts, the way that we experience the facts, the conclusions that we draw from the facts are all different. So it's not really about the facts.
Right.
People are equally incensed and equally puzzled on both sides at why the other side can't see what they see.
Right.
Tensions are incredibly high. At this point, we don't know how it's going to turn out. By the time you hear this, it will probably all be worked out.
In one way or another.
In one way or the other. And one side is going to be pissed. And unfortunately, that's sort of been the story of our country for a while now. One side's always pissed. You know, authors have ideas when they write books or when they write poems, and they have things they want to express. But ultimately, the reader is the one to experience the book. And the reader reads whatever the reader reads into that story and draws from it whatever the reader draws from it. Same with my songs. I know that. When I write a song, even songs that are incredibly personal and intimate to me, my audience will hear it a dozen different ways because they're reading their own experience into it. I have made that my friend. I have found that's incredibly valuable. And I want people to read their own stories into it. That's totally okay with me. But honestly, that's the way we are. We all take what we take from everything. Right. And we give what we give to everything. Every argument, every discussion, every point of view that we share, it's all subjective.
I feel compelled to say that that is a very postmodern deconstructionist point of view.
Yeah.
And that's not bad. But I do want to lift that up because both postmodernism and deconstruction have gotten really bad as the country has become even less intellectual than it used to be. And Americans have never loved intellectualism.
Right.
We're not the French. As we have become even less intellectually interested than we used to be, postmodernism, deconstruction have really been destroyed in popularity. And part of that's because the extremes of deconstruction and of postmodernism said, there is no reality, there is no truth, there are no facts, there's only perception. And so everything became relativism. Most of us have the instinctual sense that extreme relativism, your truth, my truth, completely separate truths, there is no thing we are both talking about, that just seems wrong somehow.
Right.
There's something not right about that.
Right. No, I agree.
Of course, that's never what the actual postmodernists or deconstructionists meant, but that's okay. That's what people did with it. What you were saying, that we listen through our own experience, we read through our own experience, whatever that is, we view through our own experience, I think is actually undeniable. And that we as human beings are incapable of being purely objective. We cannot have the God's eye view of anything.
Right.
We want to. And it may be the position to which we aspire in certain cases. For example, and since we're talking about court appointments, we may wish a judge to be perfectly objective, but we can't do that.
No.
No one can be. So then the question is, can we find a jurist who is aware of their own biases? It's that, right? It's if you're aware of your own bias, then you can kind of adjust for that and listen more sympathetically to somebody else's point of view.
Right.
Anyway, but that idea that we come to everything through our own lens, through our own experience, through our own whatever, is so important to understanding any kind of disagreement, any kind of actual agreement. Like if you and I look at the same color and you say it's chartreuse and I say it's yellow-green, we're bringing something to that. And if we disagree on it more than nomenclature for more than about a second, it means that there's power behind that disagreement. There's a reason I hang on to yellow-green. And there's a reason you hang on to chartreuse.
Yeah.
And it might be that I just like to be right. And I don't really care whether I'm right or not. That if I say it's red, I want you to capitulate and say, why, yes, that strange shade of green and yellow is really red. You know, it's like that dress, right?
Oh, yeah.
For those of you who don't know what, it doesn't matter. There was a stupid meme. Anyway, so one of the things I might be bringing to that discussion is my own need to be right.
Ah.
And I think in the particular case about which you're speaking, the confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court and the drama around that a lot of what's happening is people wanting to be right.
Yes.
Period.
Sure.
Like not really caring about truth, just wanting to be right. Okay, so that happens for us, right? So sometimes when we're talking about a particular topic, whether it's a particular color or whether it's something much bigger like Supreme Court appointment, what's really happening is our investment in being right. Then there is the kind of the secondary investment, or a different version of the investment, that has to do with our tribe, that tribal affinity. So at the worst of tribal affinity, it's my side's always right, even if we destroy you. At the more interesting part of tribal affinity is drum corps.
Ah, yeah.
Right? You're a pretty level guy in some ways.
In some ways. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so part of what you do when you describe watching drum corps is you want to see the best possible things.
Oh, yeah.
But if the Bluecoats can be the best possible, that's a perfect world.
That's a perfect world for me.
Right.
They were not the best possible this last season, and I capitulated to that early in the season because I was so incredibly wowed by Santa Clara Vanguard.
So in this case, what you were talking about when you were talking about this was about a standard of excellence, having to do with music, having to do with choreography, having to do with whatever drum corps is about, I don't know. Rather than what you were talking about when you were talking about drum corps being about your tribal affinity to Bluecoats.
Right.
For example, one of the things you could have done instead of capitulating early to the fact that Bluecoats were not at the top of their game, or were not at the top of the DCI game.
Yes.
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
One of the things you could have done is said, they've been robbed. Or you could have said, had the costumer gone with pink instead of fuchsia, you know, whatever. The thing, right. But you chose not to do that. So what you were talking about instead was some kind of vision of perfection to which they were aspiring.
Yes.
You could be having a conversation about Vanguard with Vanguard fans, and they would be thrilled that you thought Vanguard was the best and not care that you thought they were technically the best.
Right.
They would be bonding with you about Vanguard.
Because they love Vanguard.
So sometimes when we're talking about something, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about at all. It's all that tribal affinity.
For sure.
And certainly in the conversation that you started with, the confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh, part of what we're seeing is tribal affinity issues, right?
Sure.
Like that's the loudest piece, I would say, is tribal affinity.
And this is just another in a long string of these.
Sure.
What you said about needing to be right, that's what we're seeing a lot of right now. Because admitting that you're wrong, even though, okay, so on the left, one of the arguments that's being made against Judge Kavanaugh is that he's unwilling to admit the fact that he drank a lot, and that he drank so much that he might have forgotten things that he did or things that he was involved in, when lots of other people around him that were around him during that time are saying, yeah, we knew him to be a heavy drinker. But he hasn't been willing to admit that because it might sound like he's admitting weakness, or I might have been wrong in this situation or other situations. So the need to be right is more important than getting at maybe what actually happened, whether or not he is communicating the facts the way that he sees and understands them or not. It is very much about being on the right side. And he has a lot of power pushing behind him to make sure that he remains on the right side.
In perception.
Perception.
That people experience him as being on the right side.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what you're talking about. And it seems like if you admit, my team's not the best, or I might have screwed up here, or I might have done this, then you're admitting weakness. And by admitting weakness, the perception is people will see you as weak. People will see you as not powerful, not capable, not willing to do what you have to do to be president or on the Supreme Court or senator or PTA chairman or whatever it is. It could be anything. Which is quite the opposite of what we understand from Scripture and from the life of Jesus. That power actually comes from admitting weakness, embracing the things about ourselves that we need help with.
Before we go to Jesus, because I like to go to Jesus, but before we go to Jesus, I want to stick with the way you just described that argument about the liberal take. Liberal is such the wrong word in this case. The non-GOP establishment view that what is rankling people is that Kavanaugh won't admit that he might have drunk too much or more than he is expressing in high school and college, even though people who knew him are saying so. In this conversation, the way we're talking about it, it doesn't matter whether he did or he didn't. The question is, if you're hearing that whole conversation, Jane Doe testifies that he drank too much in her presence, and so she knows that at least on one occasion he had drunk too much. Or whether you're talking about his perception of it, that's not the issue. What we're talking about when we're talking about this is whether we value humility or not.
Yes.
So, for example, if Kavanaugh valued humility, if that were the lens through which he was working, he could say something like, as a teenager, I made some stupid errors. It is quite possible that I drank more than I should have. I don't recall this situation. Knowing myself now, I have trouble imagining that it was possible. I trust that this woman was hurt, but here's where I am at this point now. That would suggest humility without expressing guilt.
Right.
And so then, if what you're doing is critiquing him on that, what you're talking about is your value of humility.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. Same facts, same everything. We're all looking at people testifying in one way or another, people saying this or the other. It doesn't matter. We've all got the same amount. But what we value and the way we see the world is how we're interpreting this. So you bring up Jesus, which is wonderful. I'm glad when you bring up Jesus. Most people in the world, overall, don't care whether you bring up Jesus, right? So using Jesus as an exemplar of what power looks like, what humility looks like, what weakness actually is or isn't, is completely irrelevant to this conversation. So if one says, as a Christian, I believe blah, 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 humility, blah, 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 Jesus, blah, 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 power and weakness, what I'm talking about when I am talking about this is that.
Yeah.
That's when we start having real problems. That's why this stuff is so hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Because you could be talking about Jesus, I could be talking about humility, the person next to me could be talking about what it means to have gone to that school and how important it is. Somebody else could be talking about what it means to be on the Supreme Court. Somebody else could be talking, you know what I mean? All those things. We're all looking at the same facts, but we're not talking about the same things at all.
No, we are not talking about the same things at all.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And listeners, I realize this is getting really heady stuff. But as we go to talk about the two topics that we're going to be talking about for the last two episodes after this, that sentence made no sense, but go with me. Figuring out what it is we're talking about when we're talking about a particular topic is everything.
It's huge.
Let me give you another example of this. And this one actually has been clarified fairly frequently. So when we're talking about the system of consequences for law breaking, I'm putting that in a particular way, we can be talking about punishment. We can be talking about retribution. We can be talking about justice. We can be talking about reformation. We can be talking about all different kinds of things. Talking about exactly the same stuff. But if we value reformation or we value punishment or we value, whatever those things are, we're going to be talking about them very differently.
Yes.
And in the penal system, we've at least acknowledged that we can be coming at this from very different directions, right? Not even getting into whether it's just and fair to people of color or any of that. Just what are you doing when you put somebody in jail? What's the point of doing that? At least we understand that when we're asking that question, we may be talking from are we trying to reform the person so they can go back out? Are we trying to punish the person? Are we trying to get them to never do it again? Whatever the thing is. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about whatever. I don't think in most conversations we know that we're doing that at all.
Oh, no. I don't think so.
I wonder whether one of the reasons coupling is so hard is that for a long time when you're kind of in the throes of chemistry and whatever, or need, or, whatever those things are, I wonder whether most of the conversations a couple has start with the assumption that you're talking about the same thing.
Because you're looking to have something in common with that individual.
Right. Or you've bonded over something that is in common, and you're not even looking to have it in common. You're experiencing that bonding.
Right.
And so you're talking, and you just assume that the other person's talking the same way you are unless you come up right up against something.
Yeah.
I like shrimp. I don't like shrimp. We're going to have shrimp. What does that mean? You know what I mean? But otherwise, you're having these conversations, and you assume you're talking about the same stuff. And then at some point, you realize you're actually not talking about the same thing.
Right.
The first, of those conversations I ever had with my now husband was we had gone out to dinner, and it was a fairly expensive dinner for us at the time. And I remember there were ravioli involved, and that's the extent of my remembering of the food itself.
Right.
But it was a big deal. And we started talking about salvation. We were both in seminary, so it wasn't as weird as it sounds.
Like you do.
Like we do.
Well, we do. We're not normal. We've established that.
But we started talking about salvation, and we were, I don't know how far into it we were, but we realized we were talking about very different concepts. And it wound up with us, I won't say he was crying. I was crying. I think he was too, but I won't say that because it was so important. And we were having that moment of, holy cow, we're not talking about the same thing at all.
Yeah.
We were having a purely intellectual conversation that became not purely intellectual
Not at all. And I think that's the thing. I'm not sure we are. Maybe there are things that we can talk about that are purely intellectual, but I think most things that we talk about aren't. I don't think they can be. If we're invested at all, it's not purely intellectual.
Because we're not talking about what we're talking about. We're talking about something else.
Yeah. It's like I have friends that will get into conversations about DC Comics versus Marvel Comics.
Well, we all know which is the right one.
Well, we do. I won't proselytize. I have an appreciation for both, but there's one that I clearly favor over the other.
And anyone who's listened to us more than once
knows.
And
people get really emotional about this
stuff.
stuff.
I've seen people get really crazy about it.
I mean, really? The difference between you like and connect somehow with Spider-Man versus Superman? I mean, they're incredibly different personas.
If you put it that way, that seems obvious.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, but it isn't. That's just the thing. It isn't obvious.
Sure.
So people get invested. Same thing like around bands, around football, around anything. And some of this comes back to the tribal thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
But people get invested. And once you're invested in a point of view, it's really difficult to pry you away from that point of view. I'll admit here that for a fairly lengthy season of my adult life, I would have identified more with the conservative side of politics. Mm-hmm. I no longer do. But for a long time I did. And it had everything to do with the life that I was trying to create for myself. And when I say the life that I was trying to create for myself, what I really mean, and I'm making little quote sounds, quote things with my fingers.
But you're only doing one hand worth of quotes, which is making
it's almost
it fascinating.
It's almost like a bunny. It's like, I'm the quote bunny. Woo! So anyway, quote bunny. What I was doing was trying to create a persona for myself mm-hmm. that was comfortable mm-hmm. with those types of conservative ideals sure. and values and perceptions, etc. But I think there came a point where it became more important for me to identify with who I authentically am. Mm-hmm. Authenticity is another slippery, slidey thing. But coming to terms with the stuff that I was trying not to come to terms with mm-hmm. led me to be more honest about my politics and more mm-hmm. honest about the ways that I see mm-hmm. lots of things in the world. And it wasn't a concerted effort. It mm-hmm. wasn't something I was trying to do. Right. In fact, it was probably something I was trying to fight. But over time, those ideals changed.
Sure.
That point of view changed.
Sure.
And so people don't have to stay entrenched. But some people do stay entrenched. And they may not stay entrenched about everything. But if you've been a Pittsburgh Steelers fan since you were 8, you may always be a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Or if you've been...
Just the fact that you went to the Steelers. Like,
well, I had the Steelers jacket. I was a Steelers fan.
That's why you went to the Steelers.
But the reason I was the Steelers fan was because all my friends were Dallas Cowboys fans.
And again, how could I love you more?
I know,
and yet
right?
I do.
I know. Now I couldn't care less about the Steelers. But I cared then. The same way everybody else, all my other, in the 6th or 7th grade, when everybody else was like pro-Reagan with my little friends. Mm-hmm. None of us, of course, could vote. But they were all pro-Reagan, and I was pro-Carter all the way.
When you said, in 6th or 7th grade, all your little friends, none of you could vote. I am so glad you had no friends in 6th grade who were legally able to vote, because that would have been so sad.
Me too. Me
all
too.
Those 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds
right?
in the 6th grade, so
right.
sad.
Well, if we had a mock election, Carter would have lost. That's all I'm saying. I would have voted. I would have rallied. Right. I would have campaigned, but he would have lost.
Yeah. But can we stay on the youth thing for a second?
Yeah.
And the seasons. You framed what you were talking about as a season. I want to frame it a little differently.
Sure.
I want to frame it in terms of when we are young, it is our job to try on personas.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is.
It's our job to do that. And when we're really little, we try on the persona of our parents. So we walk around in their shoes. When we get older, we try on the persona of our peers. When we get older than that, we try on the persona of somebody, we try on all of these persona. That's our job.
Yeah.
And what should happen as we mature is kind of start pulling bits and pieces from all of these things that resonate with us, and then we try on a mix of them, and we're less invested that it fits a particular persona, a particular mold, than that it feels like right. I mean, that's part of maturity.
It is. And as we get older, I think all of us, I'll speak for myself, values that individuality, values the fact that I'm not anybody else.
But see, here's the thing. I mean, I've argued this in other places, and if you ever take our course on the two halves and one wall of life, you'll hear me talk about this a lot. But I feel pretty confident, I could be convinced otherwise, but I feel pretty confident that part of maturity has almost nothing to do with thinking of oneself as authentic or inauthentic, mm-hmm. with thinking of oneself as part of this crowd or that crowd or the other crowd. More like we have this sense of affinities and affiliations and enjoyments and all of those things. And what we discover is that each of those things puts us in another crowd. And so we're really part of about 80 crowds.
Yeah.
We wind up with 80 overlapping, this is the wrong way to put it, but 80 overlapping persona that make up us. And it bothers us less as we mature. If we are actually maturing, It bothers us less when we drop one of those because we've dropped whatever that one thing is that connects us with those, right? So, for example, if I am a Steelers fan and I move out of Pittsburgh and into New York and I become a Jets fan,
Yeah.
I might miss my connection with Steelers fans, but if I've gained some maturity, the flow of enjoying the Steelers flows to enjoying the Jets.
Yeah.
And then I also then absorb Jets fans as
Yeah.
part of my milieu of fandom.
Sure.
Okay? Lack of maturity is that clinging to the persona that you had in that world.
Right.
So going back to your conservatism, you're trying to build a family in the suburbs with 2.3 children, a Volvo, and, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not, but you understand. And for you, where you were coming up, that meant also Republican, conservative, that was the package surrounding you. And as you started being able to pick out different things that didn't fit in that, the package itself, I want to put a different spin on it than you did, the package itself became less important. So what happened then, and I think you're still doing this, I hope you're still doing this, I hope everybody's still doing this. What you're doing since then and onwards is going, oh, well, really, I don't like fuchsia. Sweets aren't actually as interesting to me as they used to be. And then that becomes who you are. What you were talking about when you were talking about any of those things is quite different than what you were talking about when you were talking about any of those things 20 years ago.
Right.
Where I think we get into real problems as a culture, as a communicating community, is when the loudest voices are the ones who are still as diehard set in their truthness at age 60 as they were at age 20.
And I think where that can be difficult, even hurtful, is around issues of personhood, around issues of theology, around issues of all that stuff that people will hold to so tenaciously, even in the face of irrefutable evidence, like flat earthers, for instance. I mean, it's like that whole thing where you become part of this tiny, tiny sub group of people that believe this one thing. And damn it, you're going to hold on to this one thing until you die, because if you let go of it, that's the thing that's going to like either send you to hell, or you're going to lose everything, or there's some cataclysm around letting go of that idea.
That's right.
That you just couldn't bear the thought of.
That's right. So, I do a lot of counseling, particularly with people who've been through some kind of trauma.
Sure.
And when I say this, I'm not making light of trauma at all. But what I hope as they are healing and dealing is that they reach a point where they don't have to hang on to their own image of themselves as trauma victims quite so tightly.
Absolutely.
Where who they are is not all about whether they're intellectually thinking this or just feeling it, and feelings are so important in this. When you experience yourself as a trauma victim, when you experience the kind of horror and pain that you can go through, and you start dealing with it, one of the things you do is start identifying as a trauma victim. At some point, what you want people to do is no longer have that as their primary identification.
Absolutely.
It's like when people come out as gay, and everything is gay. At some point, what you hope is that gay becomes a part of the list. When people become vegetarians and everything is about vegetarianism, what you hope is that vegetarian becomes part of the list. When people convert to Christianity, what you hope is that somehow when they're describing themselves, maybe not in terms of where their importance is, when they're describing themselves, Christianity becomes part of the list.
Yes.
Right? That's what it's about. It's that clinging less tightly to a very narrow affinity or affiliation that defines who you are.
Everything about you.
Everything about you. So in this conversation, and I'm going to poke at Judge Kavanaugh only because he talked longer.
Sure.
His definition of himself as a graduate of this, that, or the other school. His definition of himself as a jurist. His definition of himself as a lawyer. His definition of all of these things made up a package that, at least in the way he was talking about himself, none of those was up for any modification at all.
No one was debating him about that stuff.
But the way he presented himself, none of those was able to be modified. So, once he had said, I didn't drink that much. I was a virgin until very late. He couldn't become humble in that language we were using earlier.
Yes.
Because it would require shifting that image of himself.
Yeah.
And other people's image of him.
Right.
Whether, in fact, he's a choir boy, didn't drink, it doesn't matter. The question is that image of yourself. What do you do with that image of yourself? Or what do I do with an image of you? It's the same thing. One of the interesting memes that's been going around today in regard to this whole thing is the one that says something along the lines of, this isn't a court case, it's a job interview.
Yeah.
That our standards for guilty, not guilty in court cases are quite different than our standards for a job interview.
Sure.
So when I was pastoring, we ran background checks on everybody. Everybody. If you worked for us or you volunteered for us, we ran a background check on you. Mm-hmm. And there were people that we allowed to participate in the leadership of the church who had things on their background that were not fantastic. But we very, very tightly limited their scope and what they were able to do, and the situations they were able to do it.
Right.
Would I have wanted to go to court and accuse them of particular things and try and work that? No, because A, we didn't have any hard evidence. We had what we had seen and sometimes an actual background piece. But it was also just not the issue. We weren't trying to convict somebody of something.
Sure.
We were trying to protect other people.
Exactly.
So if we were hiring a Sunday school teacher or, accepting a volunteer Sunday school teacher, and there was any possibility that that person had done anything dangerous for anybody in a position of weakness, whether it's a child, an elder, whatever, they weren't allowed to do it.
Yeah.
They could do other things.
Sure.
We had somebody who had had a problem with money earlier in her life, and I'm talking about embezzlement type money, that kind of thing. We didn't let her do money. It's not a condemnation of the person. It's well, that might not be a good fit. That's different than deciding whether somebody is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of those kinds of things. So again, it's what are we talking about when we're talking about this? Are we talking about what's going on as a job interview? Are we talking about it in terms of a referendum on character? Are we talking about it in terms of what are we talking about when we're talking about this? Mm-hmm. And as you and I start talking about other people's sexuality and we start talking about patriotism, what it is we're talking about when we're talking about whatever those things are is going to be really important.
Very important.
Because talk about hot button issues, other people's sexuality and patriotism.
Yeah.
So getting back to the ice cream cone.
Yeah.
So the ice cream cone fight was really about the woman having been reared to think of herself as fat and ugly. And when her fiance made a comment about the second ice cream cone, all of that feeling came up. It all
came up.
And what he said was stupid.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't about the ice cream cone. And he walked into it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And my husband was wrong about salvation, but that's just a whole different conversation entirely.
We'll talk about that another time.
We'll talk about that another time.
So what do you guys think? Leave us comments. Ask us questions.
Yeah, we love questions.
We love those.
We love questions, which is why we're having conversations about the things we're having conversations about over the next 2 times we're having conversations, because people asked us questions.
They do.
They do.
And the way that we respond to those questions
is by talking nonsense for 90 minutes, cutting it down to 40 minutes and adding some music.
Yeah.
That's how we do that.
Yeah, that's kind of how we do that.
So we would love to hear from you about what you're interested in, what kind of questions you have, what topics you'd like addressed, that kind of stuff. We'd love to hear your comments on anything we've said. If you think we're right, wrong, indifferent, if you have another point of view, if you have another direction to think, we'd love to hear that stuff. If you want us to come to you to talk about this stuff, email us, info@schoolforseekers.com. If you want Benton to come and play a house concert, email us. If you want me to stop talking about ice cream cones, email us, let us know. We really want to make this useful to you. And if you like what you hear, or you listen to us more than occasionally, we would love it if you would become supporters of ours. And you can do that in all kinds of ways. You can do it by writing reviews on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. You can do it by actually giving us money through, well, there are all kinds of ways to do it, but you could just write us a check that says cash, add a bunch of zeros before the decimal point, and we would be very grateful.
Sure would.
Or, in the real world, what you could do is go to patreon.com/cocktail theology and give money to this effort on a monthly basis. We so appreciate that. Yeah, you could write us fan mail.
You could.
You could tell people about this.
Please do that and subscribe. And if this is the first time you've heard us, we have 23 other episodes.
Sometimes we talk about something
And
rather
I
than
bet-
talking about what it is we're talking.
Right.
We're Seinfeld tonight.
Oh, look at that.
I know.
We are.
Sorry, carry on.
So I bet if you went back and listened to all 23, you might come up with a question or two.
That's right.
So I will invite you to do that, not all in one day,
Yes.
or that would be way too much.
No,
But-
it wouldn't.
I don't know. We talk about some pretty heavy stuff. Hanging out with us for a day would be fine.
Hanging out with us for a day is fun.
It's actually really fun.
People
We know how to have a good time. But listening to us talk about some of the things we talk about for hours and hours and hours.
Well, I guess if you did it all in one day, that would be like, by the time we're done, it's going to be a 24-hour day. It'd be 24 hours of listening to us.
Yeah, of listening to us.
You started to say of listening to you.
No,
It'd be
I didn't.
I'm just kidding.
I didn't.
I'm giving him a hard time. But yeah, please, we want to know what you're talking about.
We do.
And we're starting to talk about our second season and about what that's going to look like. So
Yeah, so anything, input that you guys give us will definitely inform our next season.
it will inform our next season. And again, if you want us to come to you to do anything in 2019, now is the time to start talking about that with us, because we're setting up our travel schedules and all of those other things.
Yep, for
that's
sure.
useful. Anything else you want to say, sir?
Happy fall.
Happy fall, everybody. And if you're not listening to this in fall, happy wherever you are.
Right, whenever you are.
Whenever you are. Bye.
Bye.